Hey guys, Preston here. Welcome back to Woods Trading Fishing. Today's video is another bass fishing tutorial. So these are 5 questions that a lot of people ask, outside of just the gear. Our first video was about the gear that you use, beginning bass fishing gear. This one is 5 questions that's kind of outside the gear that most people would ask, like, logistics, like how to get the fish to bite, how to get them on the bank or the boat, wherever you're fishing out of, and then just those main two things. So these 5 questions here are really, like I said, will get you to do those things, get them to bite and then land them. So number 1, how to know if I'm getting a bite. So I grabbed a couple rods here that we showed in our last video a little over a week ago. Make sure to go back and watch that video if you want to know the actual gear that I suggest for beginning bass fishing. So here we got a bait caster and a spinning rod. So I highlighted these 2 exact ones in our last video, but as far as a bait caster, you hold the bait caster like this. All right, let's say you're fishing something slow, like last video I talked about a Texas rig, soft plastics where you're just kind of dragging it like a lizard or a Texas rig worm. So when you're dragging it, you feel the little bite. So holding your rod like this, you'd feel it right here. You feel the little tick when they're biting it. If you're throwing a moving bait, it's a lot easier to know if you have a bite because you're constantly reeling it and it just loads up. So for instance, like a spinner bait, bladed jig, paddle tail swim bait, things that you just throw out and reel in, crankbait, those just really load up. So it's a little bit easier to tell if you actually have a bite on those. So, but you feel that tick, and then also you can watch your line. So if you're fishing slow with a worm, you watch that line kind of jump, and that's when you know you have a bite. Always make sure to have tension. So don't ever have slack in your line. Always watch your line, make sure it's tight. You might want to have a little bit of bow in your line. That way if you're fishing a worm, you don't want to constantly be reeling it. You want to be dragging it, and then just kind of have that slight bow in your line. But you want to have enough tension to feel that bite. Spinning rod, holding it like this, you're going to have your finger right here above the reel seat, and you're going to feel that tick right there on that rod. A lot of spinning rods will actually have an exposed part on the reel's grips, where it's the exposed part of the rod blank, so it's easier to feel. You're holding it like this with your thumb. You can feel that bite a little bit better with that. So that's how you know if you have a bite, depending on the lure. And then the next question is, what's the best way to cast without getting tangled? So spinning rods are a little bit easier. They don't tangle up as much. However, I have found that they do tangle up, line twist, if you're not using braided line. So in our last video, talked about, I suggest putting braided line on there simply because it's more limp. It's not, it doesn't twist as much as traditional monofilament or fluorocarbon. So, it's slicker, easier to cast, just way better. So if you're tangling up your line on a spinning rod, it's probably because you're not using braid or you're overfilling it. If you overfill, you want to leave a little bit of the spool exposed after spooling the line on the reel, and that goes with a spinning or bait caster. So you don't want to overfill it, or it'll just blow up when you click that bell or push the button. So braided line on a spinning rod, and then a bait caster. You can also throw braid, but it does a lot better with traditional monofilament or fluorocarbon line. It doesn't tangle up as much. Just make sure when you're throwing it, if this is the first time throwing a bait caster, or you've done it a little bit, but don't do it that often. Just make sure to have your there's two knobs here, two main knobs on the any bait caster reel. So the one beside the handle is going to be your spool tension knob. That is the one that adjusts, the tension of the spool. So if you turn it left, it's looser. If you turn it right, that's tighter. So you want it fairly tight starting out, and then you want to tighten it pretty good when you're spooling the line on there. If you just bought it, spool the line on there. When you have your bait tied on, press the button. That bait's gonna barely fall is what you want it to do. If it falls too fast, you want to tighten it. If it doesn't fall, you want to loosen it just a hair. So make sure you use that spool tension knob to adjust, depending, and it all depends on the weight of your bait. If you're throwing a heavy bait, you want it tighter. If you're throwing a lighter bait, you want it looser. Like I said, just press that button and you want that bait to barely fall down. So that's the main knob that you're wanting to adjust on this. The other one is the brakes. Okay, the brakes, you want same thing, start out fairly tight. The higher number, a lot of them will say max or minimum. A lot of them will go 1 to 20. So you want the max or 20. You want closer to that starting out. So the looser the brakes, the easier that line can tangle up. So if you're just starting out, I would suggest going tighter on that as well, and then adjust from there. So the brakes really just helps you with your accuracy. Once you get comfortable with it, can loosen the brakes and be more accurate, or casting distance. Also helps with that, loosening the brakes. So, that's definitely crucial in knowing how to not or keep from getting tangled as much. So, third question, how do I set the hook properly? If you're throwing something slow like a worm or jig, most of the time you feel that bite, you reel down and you set the hook as hard as you can. If it's something like a moving bait, like a crankbait or top water, or anything with treble hooks, number one rule with anything with treble hooks is do not set the hook hard. You'd think with more hooks that fish would stay on easier. Well, it's actually the opposite. So the treble hooks, a lot of fish can come off with treble hooks. If you rip it, it'll rip it right out of their mouth. So treble hooks, crankbaits and whatnot, you just lean right into them. If it's something like a spinner bait, chatter bait, really any moving bait, you're reeling and that fish hits it. If it gets heavy, you just kind of lean into them. You don't want to set the hook too hard, don't want to set the hook too soft. So treble hooks, soft hook set, spinner bait, chatter bait, any moving bait with a single hook, kind of a sweeping into them, let it load up, but lean into them hard. Jig or worm or something that you drag slow, you want to reel down and set the hook super hard. So just kind of depending on the bait is how you want to do it. It also depends on your rod as well. So if you have a really heavy rod or a stiffer rod, you don't have to set the hook as hard because that rod kind of does all the power. If it's a more limber rod, sometimes you have to lean into them a little bit more to get that rod power to drive that hook in. So it all depends on the rod and all that. But just to keep it simple, that's what I would start out doing as far as setting the hook properly. So, fourth question, how do I keep fish from getting off my hook? Two things. One is don't horse them as much. If they're coming up throwing the hook, keep your rod down. So a lot of times, especially on treble hook baits, like I mentioned, they'll come up and throw it. Keep your rod tip down to keep the fish from jumping as much, and they won't come off. And then when you're doing that, don't lean into them and try to get them up as quickly. Just kind of let them let them run. If they're starting to run, you want to have your drag set loose enough to where when they run that it pulls the line out. So don't horse them, you know, just let them run when they're wanting to. Last question, how do I choose the right lure or bait? So I talked about a few different baits, you know, moving baits versus slow dragging baits. Usually, you know, if the fish are biting really good, if I'm wanting to fish a lot of different places, I'll throw a moving bait. Usually first thing in the morning, the fish are most active. You can start out with a moving bait like a top water or a spinner bait, something that you just throw out and reel in and make multiple casts, something you can cover a lot of water with. If they are finicky, they're kind of slowing down throughout the day, or maybe it's like really hot like it is right now in the summer, and they're just not biting as well, you might want to slow down with a worm or a jig. So really just let the fish tell you what they want. In the fall, you know, once it cools off a little bit, they start to bite things like top waters, lipless crankbaits and stuff like that. So you can really capitalize on the fish feeding on shad and bait fish. You know, right now it's hot. Sometimes you got to really slow down. Sometimes you got to downsize. Sometimes you got to go to, you know, downsizing as in smaller weights, smaller baits, or smaller line. So it really just let the fish tell you what they want. So I hope y'all like this video. If you do, please like and subscribe to the channel, and please let us know any questions you have. Thank y'all for watching.